The morning she banged on my door, I thought it was a neighbor with a bad heart, the kind of pounding that makes you sit up, pull on jeans, and swear you'll never sleep through a knock again. It wasn't a neighbor. It was Evelyn Greeley, HOA president of Harrow Ridge, breath like a brass bell, and a folder so thick it looked official even when she wasn't. She stood at my porch with a stare that said she'd spent her whole week rehearsing the moment she'd tell me my life was a violation. "You have 30 days to correct the violation," she said, like she was reading a menu. "Or we'll take further action." That's how the whole thing started, with a sentence that wanted to be a sentence. My name is Mark Hollis. My grandparents bought the property back before Harrow Ridge was more than a farmer's lane and a rumor. I always thought of the place as ours, not in some dramatic, cinematic way, but as a slow accumulation of years. The sagging porch, the grapevine on the fence, the old tool shed my dad swore he would fix and never did. I liked that it felt outside a committee's scope. I liked that my mailbox didn't have a sticker telling me how to paint my mailbox. Evelyn's first move was small and theatrical. An orange violation stapled to the garage door, stiff as a judgment. It said my driveway angle violated setback rules. It said my lawn had ornamental statues that weren't approved. It said, in bureaucratic language, that I was an eyesore. She left her calling card in a neat typeface and marched down the street like someone delivering an ancient sentence. I could have laughed it off. People get cranky about yard gnomes. But something in the way she smiled when she stapled that paper, the smile of someone winning an argument that hadn't started, made me dig through the old closing folder that afternoon, because I have a habit of keeping things that my grandmother thought were important. On the second page, tucked under a canceled check from 1978, was a county plat and a deed stamp that didn't match the HOA map. The line that mattered, the surveyor's red line, ran around my property, not through it. My heart did the quiet, slow thump you get when you realize you've been listening to somebody argue about your life when the truth has been on paper the whole time. I printed copies, drove to the county recorder's office, and paid for certified copies like a man buying proof of his own life. When I showed Evelyn the deed, I expected a pause, maybe an embarrassed cough. Instead, she folded the paper in half and set it on fire, metaphorically. She smoothed it down, looked at me like I'd produced a grocery list that offended her, and said, "Those aren't county-sanctioned maps. Those are irrelevant." She called me obstinate. She called me defiant. She called the board. What she didn't call, at first, was the sheriff. That's when the neighborhood started to divide along a line that had nothing to do with property lines and everything to do with ego. A few people who'd always nodded at my fence started nodding harder. Luis from 3 doors down, a quiet man with a handyman's hands, brought over a rover's worth of questions and a thermos of coffee. Tammy, who runs the newsletter, knocked on my door at sunset and said, "You sure you want to fight?" I wasn't looking for one, but there are fights you don't choose and fights you inherit the moment someone challenges the way you carry your life. Evelyn's tactics escalated in a way that had the smell of performance. She organized an inspection, men with reflective vests and clipboards who stood in my yard and announced infractions like a theater troupe. She staged a sidewalk meeting where she read my supposed sins aloud while neighbors watched from their porches, as if this were a town square drama and she the director. She called in that classic playbook of small power politics: anonymous letters, social media whispers, an ill-timed complaint to the utilities about a safety hazard near my meter. People started pointing, because when someone dresses a little louder than you and has a clipboard, they often look like authority. I'll admit, there were nights I replayed Evelyn's words and wondered if I'd been arrogant, not about land, but about how I thought rules shouldn't apply to me. But the deed didn't lie, and the county officials, when finally called, didn't speak in the soft, performative sentences Evelyn used. The deputy who came out to look at the plat didn't have time for theatrics. He had a pen, a measured patience, and a habit of closing cases that smelled like petty power grabs. "This property predates your HOA's formation," he said to Evelyn in a tone that made the air between them thin. "You don't have jurisdiction." That line gutted her warm up like a whistle collapsing. When the sheriff's word landed, people started asking questions publicly they'd only murmured in whispers. Why had Evelyn been policing so aggressively? Why did she feel entitled to our quiet lives? It turned out Evelyn had reasons that sounded human until you put them next to the evidence. A cottage industry of control, friendships with board members who liked the attention, a need to be seen as the one who could fix a neighborhood's problems. Power, when it enters a small town, doesn't always arrive with transparency. Sometimes it arrives with trophies and a sense of destiny. And then it got mean. Late one night, I found my driveway flattened with nails, not enough to puncture a tire if you were lucky, but enough to send a message. A neighbor's security camera caught a shadow, a profile she swore she recognized from earlier meetings. A sign appeared reading, "Community standards apply," nailed into my yard in the middle of the night. My truck's taillight was slashed with something sharp. Someone had keyed the hood with a precise, ridiculous profanity. The escalation felt personal in a way that cut deeper than any legal paper could. It turned from power play to vendetta. I started recording everything. I kept a folder that became larger than the county deed photos, timestamps, a chain of reported calls. I organized everything the way a man organizes tools, practical, careful, with an eye for what might matter. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth to be undeniable. Evidence piles up like snow until the outline of what happened becomes visible. The community reaction changed when I took the evidence public. Tammy printed copies for the newsletter. Luis handed them out at the farmer's market. The sidewalk meeting that had once been Evelyn's stage became a place where neighbors lined up to say, quietly, "I saw it too." The man with the reflective vest refused to return phone calls. The board members who'd let Evelyn run the show found themselves answering simple, painful questions. Why didn't you check? Why did you let her act alone? It's easier to be complicit when the problem doesn't touch you until it does. The climax came on a humid Thursday that smelled like rain, but didn't deliver. Evelyn arranged a tow company to remove my small boat, claiming it was abandoned property and a nuisance. I showed up with the sheriff. The tow driver looked embarrassed. Evelyn, in her pale blazer, looked furious in a way that made the block hold its breath. "You're trespassing on HOA property," she hissed, and then the deputy, the same calm man who'd read the county records, said, clearly for everyone to hear, "This is private property. The deed is clear. Back off." He handed her a copy of the certified plat and left a silence like a gavel. What followed was less of a courtroom scene and more of a human unmasking. Evelyn had power when people believed in her, when her denunciations were met with silence. Take that away, and what's left is a person's choices, small cruelties, and the hunger to be in control. People voted at the next board meeting. The vote wasn't just about policy. It was about who our neighborhood asked to speak for it. Evelyn was removed from the board, not by dramatic spectacle, but by neighbors who decided they wanted a quieter, fairer leadership. She left with her folder, which was thinner than it had been in the beginning. In the aftermath, life didn't become a parade of virtue. The hedge still needed trimming. The shed still had a missing nail. But the tone of the neighborhood changed, quieter, maybe, but less fearful. Louise stopped by with a six-pack and said, "You did the right thing." Tammy mailed back the newsletter she'd used to spread the certified plat. She wrote, simply, "We needed to see the truth." It's funny, the way truth can be both a legal document and a community act. I want to be honest about the thing that surprised me: empathy. After everything, Evelyn came by with a box of muffins and an apology that tasted like someone who'd been stripped of the script she loved. She said, "I thought I was protecting the neighborhood." That line, "protect the neighborhood," contains so many excuses. It also contains a kernel of truth. People who act out of fear sometimes wrap themselves in righteousness. I forgave her, not because she deserved it, but because holding on to that anger would have kept her power continuous in my head. If there's any moral, it's not a neat one. Systems matter. Boundaries on power matter. But so does the slow work of neighbors talking to neighbors, of printing a county plat and walking it door to door, of saying, plainly, we don't have to accept bullying as governance. There are lessons about documentation. Yes, keep your deeds, keep receipts, keep photos, but there's also a lesson about watching the small things. The way a clipboard can look like authority, the way a smile can hide a hunger for control. So here's the real question I want to leave you with. What would you do if someone told you your life was a violation? Would you dig through old boxes? Would you call the deputy? Would you hand a certified plat to someone who thought they outranked you? Tell me what justice looks like to you. Was Evelyn a villain, or a neighbor gone too far? Did the community act rightly, or did we let a loud personality decide how we felt about each other for too long? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Was this about law or about power? Share a story if you faced a similar fight, or just tell me what you'd have done at the knock on the porch. If this made you think about how we govern our little corners of the world, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this messy, human, and small town loud, stick around. I'd love to hear your take.